Nobody warns you that some mornings can hurt before the day has even begun. Not because something terrible happened, not because your life is falling apart, but because opening your eyes also means opening the door to every expectation, every responsibility, every uncertainty waiting outside your bedroom. And somehow, the future can feel heavier than the present. So let me ask you something. Why do so many of us feel strangely relieved when the day is finally over? Even though morning is supposed to symbolize hope, more than 100 years ago, one poet asked a question so haunting that it still feels deeply personal today. Shall I call you sunrise or downfall? This is the hidden meaning behind one of Rainer Maria Rilke's most mysterious poems. Have you ever noticed something strange? Why is it that the evening often feels peaceful while the morning can feel overwhelming? You would think it should be the other way around. Morning is supposed to symbolize hope, a fresh start, new opportunities. And yet, for many people, the first moments after waking up are filled with something else entirely. A quiet weight, anxiety, a feeling that something is waiting for them. Not because anything bad has happened, but because anything could happen. More than 100 years ago, one poet captured this feeling in just a few lines. He wrote, "Shall I call you sunrise or downfall? For sometimes I fear the morning." Those words were written by Rainer Maria Rilke, and even today, they feel strangely familiar. Because Rilke wasn't simply talking about mornings. He was talking about what the morning represents. The future, the unknown, expectation. Every sunrise asks something of us. It asks us to become someone again, to make decisions, to face uncertainty, to carry responsibilities we were able to forget, if only for a few hours. Perhaps that's why mornings can feel heavier than nights. At night, nothing more is expected of us. The day is over. There are no more choices to make, no more conversations to replay, no more goals to chase, only silence. Rilke understood something that modern psychology would only begin to describe much later. Human beings rarely fear the present. We fear what the future might bring. Psychologists call this anticipatory anxiety. The mind rehearses possibilities before reality has even had the chance to unfold. It imagines failures that haven't happened, conversations that don't exist, losses that may never come. And by doing so, it quietly steals the peace of the present moment. That is why Rilke continues, "I reach timidly toward the rosy glow of dawn." Notice that word, timidly. He doesn't embrace the sunrise. He reaches toward it with hesitation. The dawn is beautiful. Its colors are soft. The sky promises another beginning. Yet beneath that beauty, he senses something unsettling, as if the morning itself were carrying a hidden uncertainty. He even writes that he hears fear in its flute. What an extraordinary image. A flute should sound joyful, light, almost playful. But Rilke hears anxiety inside the music, because sometimes the world isn't frightening. Our own imagination is. And perhaps that is one of the deepest truths about being human. The greatest battles we fight often begin long before anything has actually happened. Not in the world, but quietly, inside ourselves. But then, the poem takes an unexpected turn. After speaking of fear, hesitation, and uncertain mornings, Rilke suddenly writes, "But the evenings are gentle and mine." Gentle and mine. It's a remarkable contrast. The morning, which most people associate with hope, fills him with unease. Yet the evening, so often linked with endings and darkness, feels like home. Why? Because evening asks nothing of us. The race is over. The expectations have quieted. For a little while, we're no longer trying to become someone. We're simply allowed to be. Think about your own life. How often have you carried the weight of tomorrow before tomorrow even arrived? A deadline, an exam, a difficult conversation, a decision you knew you couldn't avoid. Hours, sometimes days, of quiet anxiety. And then, strangely, once the day is finally over, you breathe again. Nothing around you has changed, but something inside you has. Perhaps Rilke understood that peace does not always come from certainty. Sometimes it comes from surrender. He continues, "By my gaze they are quietly illuminated." Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say that the evening is beautiful on its own. He says that his way of seeing gives the evening its light. This is one of the deepest ideas in all of Rilke's poetry. The world is never only what it is also how we meet it. Two people can stand beneath the same sunset. One sees the end of another exhausting day. The other sees gratitude. The sunset hasn't changed. Only the eyes looking at it have. Then comes one of the most beautiful images in the entire poem. Forests fall asleep in my arms. Of course, he doesn't mean this literally. He is describing a feeling, a moment when the boundary between himself and the world begins to disappear. The forests, the evening, the silence. They're no longer outside of him. He belongs to them, and they belong to him. For a brief moment, there is no conflict, no striving, no need to prove anything, only presence. It is a kind of peace that many of us experience without realizing it. Watching the last light disappear, walking home in silence, sitting alone after a long day, listening to rain against the window. These moments rarely solve our problems, but they remind us that we are more than our problems. Perhaps that is why evenings can feel so healing. Not because darkness removes suffering, but because it removes distraction. It allows us to stop running, and finally, to hear ourselves again. As the poem reaches its final lines, Rilke leaves us with one last image, perhaps the most beautiful of them all. And I am akin to the darkness in the violins. Think about that for a moment. Why a violin? Because a violin can sound unbearably sad. And yet, its sadness is beautiful. No one listens to a violin and thinks it has failed because it isn't cheerful. Its melancholy is precisely what gives it depth. Perhaps human beings are not so different. We spend so much of our lives trying to escape uncomfortable emotions. We hide our fears. We silence our grief. We rush through loneliness as if it were a mistake that needs to be corrected. But Rilke suggests something entirely different. What if these emotions are not signs that life is broken, but signs that we are fully alive? He ends the poem with the words, "Through all my darkness." Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "I have overcome my darkness." He doesn't say, "I have defeated it." He simply acknowledges it. It is part of him, not his entire identity, but part of the landscape that shaped the person he became. This idea appears again and again throughout Rilke's writing. He believed that the deepest parts of ourselves are often born from the experiences we would never have chosen. Loss teaches us to treasure love. Loneliness teaches us the value of connection. Failure teaches us humility. And uncertainty reminds us that control has always been an illusion. Perhaps that is why the morning frightened him. Not because he feared life itself, but because every new day asks us to step once more into uncertainty. And perhaps that is why the evening felt like home. Because for a brief moment, nothing needed to be proven. Nothing needed to be achieved. Nothing needed to be fixed. Only accepted. Maybe the real question was never whether life is a sunrise or a sunset. Maybe both are necessary. Without the sunrise, we would never begin. Without the sunset, we would never learn to let go. And perhaps the most courageous thing we can do is not to choose between light and darkness, but to allow both to shape us. So the next time you wake up feeling anxious or find yourself strangely comforted by the quiet of the evening, remember that you are not alone. More than a century ago, Rainer Maria Rilke felt the very same thing. And instead of trying to escape it, he transformed it into poetry. Thank you so much for watching. If this reflection resonated with you, consider leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you interpret Rilke's words, or what poem or philosopher you'd like to explore next. Until next time, take care of yourself. And don't forget, sometimes the parts of ourselves we try hardest to hide are the very parts that teach us how to truly see.